Sir, thank you so much for coming to the Interspecies Conclave at Atria. We are so thrilled to have you. You have been an ecologist and with the expertise of developing conservational models for complex scenarios. Before we dive into all of this, I would love to know from you about your journey. How did you start? Did you really want to be an ecologist? Was it always a passion or it came along?
No, thanks for having me here. I would have liked to say to somebody that I have laid my path in a very stepwise manner and reached here, but that's certainly not the case. I trained as an engineer. At that time, if you had asked me that I would have been an ecologist, I would have known. So after doing my engineering, I was always interested in the outdoors, and I sought out opportunities where I can volunteer for NGOs and so on. That kind of opened a lot of doors. I realized that the same organization was planning to start a master's program where anybody with any background can actually get trained as a wildlife biologist. And once I finished the program, then I realized that this is where my passion lies, and slowly transitioned into ecology. And right now, although I train to be more of a scientist, I would like to do more work that's involving conservation and being outside on the ground. So I guess that's how I got here.
Thank you for your response. So my next question is based on elephants. So you of course have a fair amount of peripheral knowledge on elephants and also with your previous experience and expertise. Now our forest minister of Karnataka government, Shri Ishwar Khandre, he recently posted a picture of an elephant which died by electrocuting on June 6th in Kodagu. Now this is not new for sure. I mean, it happens and we know it happens very much. Now there are two questions which come from it. One is, how much do you think that it is important to have the technology more involved in wildlife conservation, since clearly most of the national parks in the country don't have a count of the wildlife. So how important it is to have those numbers. And the second would be, today that we have enough innovation in AI, in tech, what big of a role do you think they can also play in India for wildlife conservation?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that question. Two things. The methodological approaches to enumerating wildlife, that has two angles. One is from a biological angle. How do you do it in the right way so that the methods cater to what you need? Each species has its own needs when it comes to counting. You count elephants differently. You don't necessarily count, to be clear. You estimate how many are there. And the methods to do that varies widely across species. The same thing that you would use to enumerate monkeys just doesn't work. We have to work on that. A lot of work has already gone on, especially in India's ecosystems. Many of my colleagues are directly involved. For a long time, I'm not directly involved in elephant research, but peripherally. But I can still say that stuff like the elephant deaths, for example, a lot of work is going on specifically, and they are going to address that. But the other side is, how do you then take this technology or techniques and kind of scale it using technology? In fact, I am working with a team that is doing exactly this and trying to be ambitious about that, building technology that can help make species enumeration easier, efficient, safe, and at the same time make it happen quickly. There is a space for that. I think regardless of whether the interspecies movement takes hold, I think the discovery portion has to still happen at any cost. And yes, there is immense scope, and I'm glad that in a place like India there is opportunity to do it, despite all the impediments that might be there. We can do that, and I think I'm happy to be working in that area and hope that we can make some good breakthroughs and think ambitiously on that.
Sure. So I saw some initiatives in South Africa which are kind of trying to, if not replicate, but maybe they're inspired by the interspecies movement model on a very smaller scale, where, for example, there is the Wildcard initiative in South Africa, where one can adopt a digital twin of an animal from an endangered species and then commit to a monthly donation and become a guardian. Now there's the major question which comes to this is lack of regulation in this space, because the data of that animal is pretty much going out. I could be a poacher, and just by committing to a mere amount vis-a-vis the amount that I can get for the tusks of that elephant. So what do you think in the future what is the importance of data regulation in wildlife conservation space, and how do you think we should approach this problem?
Absolutely. I think the data flow, regardless of how many attempts are made to regulate it, is going to have leaks and get out there. So I think we must accept that collecting so much data is eventually going to land in the wrong place, rather than be in denial that such an operation can happen. And if we appreciate that, or at least acknowledge its presence, we'll be able to come up with some kind of framework on who will ultimately be taking care of this data. Is it to be maintained entirely by the state? That also can sometimes have problems. Is it to be maintained by private players, or is it to be a separate entity, an autonomous body that, in collaboration with, say, the stakeholders, the local communities, and possibly ethics committees, possibly civil societies, then come up with a framework so that the body eventually should have some teeth, autonomy, which can kind of curb itself, but at the same time do the right thing. Clearly, this is going to be one of the thorny issues, regardless of whether this feeds into the movement of money or not. Data is now going to be collected from ecosystems everywhere, and we should start having conversations on who is going to regulate that data.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, I think I would just add that maybe an autonomous body should be the first solution, and then work around it. Need not be the ending point, but at least it should be the starting point, fed by other agencies, stakeholders, and so on.
Thank you so much for your response. My next question is about what are your expectations in this conference? Any major takeaways that you want to talk about?
I think the first thing would be on top of my mind is to more openly talk about the big idea that is being discussed. Reach out to as many people as you can. In fact, seek out opposing views, find out what's the rationale behind those views, and then try and build a map of all those ideas. What can come out of this? What are the fallouts? In my opinion, that has to be done a lot more thoroughly before we implement it in any form. Try and understand. I know we know a lot about our previous experiences doing something similar, but it's possibly not enough. We'll have to go out there, send the idea out, get it critiqued by people, then come back and keep thinking. And I don't think this is a linear process. It has to be a feedback process. So conversations is what I would say is the most important next step. A lot of feedback, work on those ideas, revive them, re-engineer those ideas, and keep doing that in loop till there is some kind of broad agreement on what this is in the first place and what the consequences would be. I don't think we can imagine the consequences with just the idea. There are many things that are simply out of scope at this stage. So it would be good to spend some time there.
Thank you. My last question to you would be of interdisciplinary learning. So at Atria, we specialize in liberal STEM. Again, the whole idea is to use a problem-solving approach to teach students how to look at problems via different lenses. Do you think that such a university or universities the likes of Atria can actually pioneer the interspecies movement, or even students who are exposed to such a different curriculum would have a chance at, let's say, would have a better chance at saving the earth or contributing to the greater good?
I think it does fit in very much at the core of what we try to do, that is create good citizens who can fit in. Societies don't remain the same. So today's value systems and the complexities involved are going to change. So I guess what we want are people who are not adapted or adopted to one particular way of living, but adapted to thinking on their feet and doing things as and when needed. And I think universities like Atria or the many other new ones like KRIA who believe in taking the interdisciplinary approach are going to carve out that new way of looking at these complex problems. So definitely it has a role to play. And how it will be successful simply depends on how crucial that interdisciplinary thinking translates to actual practical stuff. So somebody was telling the other day that interdisciplinary should be seen as a band where each person has their own strengths, but together they create music, which individually they might not be able to. Which means individually they have strengths in one instrument maybe. Sometimes I feel that interdisciplinary may be lost in thinking about creating a jack of all trades.
Correct.
And rather than master of one. But yeah, maybe that is good too, but we should have the discussion of whether that is going to be the next thing that we need. Why not still give strengths to people and open them up to the interdisciplinary kind of thinking, which hasn't happened. Maybe that way you can kind of bridge the gap until we find our footing on how to go forward.
Great. Thank you, Kat.